Well, for years and years, the Indian IT sector has been a major draw here at the World Economic Forum in Davos, and India continues to attract worldwide talent. Who better to talk about the India story and the IT sector than Rishad Premji, the chairperson of Wipro. Thanks very much for being with us.
Vishnu.
We'll talk about IT in a bit, but you were telling me something fascinating about sustainable development and the IT sector, and how Wipro has certain targets to make this more than just shop talk. You're actually going to do something about it. How?
No, one of the things that's becoming an important conversation world over, and certainly here at Davos, is sustainability.
Yeah.
I think the world needs to be focusing on this on a urgent basis, and that's a conversation that's happening very prevalently here. We as a company, as I was mentioning to you, Vishnu, last year in April, committed to transform to net zero. We were one of the few founding companies, which means true decarbonization by the year 2040. And so that's a very, very important focus for us, with a interim commitment of 55% by 2030.
Right.
We've also got these targets approved by a standard called SPTI, which is incredibly important. So how we go about doing it is critical.
Right.
And there are a few interim milestones that we've set for ourselves in terms of how do we actually get to that 55%. Certainly. So renewable energy, 100% of our campuses will have renewable energy by 2030. All our transport vehicles that we use as a company will be electric vehicles. And so those kinds of things are the way we're sort of moving forward. But it's something we think is incredibly important from a community standpoint. And frankly, it's also becoming incredibly important from a business standpoint. It's becoming table stakes to participate on a global basis, in my view.
Let's talk about the IT sector in India. JP Morgan recently has downcast, where they assess the Indian IT sector going. Do you agree with that? They say that the best may already be behind us.
Well, I respectfully disagree. I still see a huge amount of buoyancy in the long run for digital transformation, right? And despite the world that we're living through, the world of an uncertain war, the world of high commodity prices, the world of high inflation, the world of COVID still not being fully behind us, despite that uncertainty, I still see a fair amount of buoyancy in the opportunities, right? When I talk to the large organizations, our large customers, when I talk to the large consulting firms, I think demand still remains quite robust, and so I'm very, very optimistic about how the next few years unfold. The biggest challenge for us still remains supply versus demand. So being able to meet demand is still the biggest challenge, which is a good problem to have. So I'm quite optimistic about the journey for technology and technology services.
What about the macro picture of the Indian economy, the fact that inflation is now at record levels, the fact that the rupee is at an all-time low, and the fact that there are headwinds externally as well. There's a war happening in Ukraine, there's food insecurity. So all in all, the economy faces challenges. How does that affect the IT sector? Does it affect Wipro?
Yeah, so it's interesting, as I was saying, that despite all the uncertainties, and when you talk to the economists, when you talk to the bankers, when you talk to the consultants, when you talk to customers, one of the clear views is there's this deep concern and uncertainty, but people can't predict how things are going to unfold over the next 12 months. And despite that, as I was mentioning, people are still investing and pushing forward. There are a lot of customers who are saying that despite the concerns of the short term, that they are going to sort of push through and invest in the longer term. So I see demand, as I said, quite buoyant. The one thing I do see happening perhaps is for larger deals, customers are being a little bit more thoughtful. Perhaps they are breaking them down into smaller components. Perhaps they're delaying decision making a little bit, but the fundamental premise of transforming your organization to participate in this digital world and to sort of reimagine experiences, re-architect the way you serve your customers, to move to the cloud, to leverage data more smartly, to drive security, to avail talent that's available globally with a large scale in India, I think that fundamentally continues and doesn't change.
Let's talk about some of the key points which is actually being discussed here in Davos. Web 3.0, the metaverse, blockchain, of course, has been spoken about for a few years, and of course 5G, which is the underlying technology which will really propel all of this. Do you see a serious change coming about in the Indian IT sector and consumers like me with some of these ideas, becoming more reality than just talk?
No, I mean, they are reality, right? I mean, blockchain technology has been around for a while. It is the underlying technology for crypto. I'm of the view that the new real world will be a true combination of the physical world and the digital world. That is the new world. So the metaverse is real. I mean, I think it is going to change the way we work, the way we transact, the way we communicate, the way we interact, right? And so there's a reality that will prevail. Customers are evaluating that very seriously. I know one of our teams just had a meeting in the metaverse. We are going to have a executive committee in the metaverse. So customers are certainly moving in that direction. And the technology industry and we as Wipro are participating that all the way from helping design chips that go into the hardware, to the software, to actually building use cases. So the industry is evolving. To me, this is an extension of this whole digital transformation.
Tell us a little bit more about that. How is Wipro engaged in the metaverse for the work that you do?
Right. So exactly as I said. So one is how do we help customers on the hardware side, right? The actual physical stuff that you need to participate in the metaverse. How do you help customers on the software side? How do you help them build applications that can be used in the metaverse? How do you help them transact through commerce engines on the metaverse? Build content for the metaverse. So all of those components are things we are participating in, and we've built a practice now that sits right in the heart of our applications and data group, which is a metaverse practice.
Yeah. You know, on the one hand, you've got Wipro at the cutting edge of so many aspects of the IT industry, and you've got the India story, which is promising at so many levels. But there are other issues as well in terms of international perception. You know, there is a problem of polarization in our country. There's a problem of arguments that, you know, communities are being deliberately targeted. In terms of the international environment and how the world sees India, are these problems?
No, look, I think there's huge optimism on India, right? And there's a large delegation from India here at the forum, and I think there's a lot of excitement in terms of the India potential. You know, I had one chairman tell me the other day that this is India's decade, and if we don't capture it, we'll miss out on the opportunity. So I think there's a huge positivity around India. There's certainly a de-risking strategy around China, as we all know. I think it's becoming even more urgent given the no tolerance for COVID policy. So there's a short-term opportunity there as well. But I'm very optimistic about the positivity around India, and India is a long-term investment destination, not only from a manufacturing perspective, from a supply perspective, but also the domestic market.
What about outflows leaving, I mean negative outflows from the Indian markets? You know, a lot of foreign investors have pulled out. The numbers are also fairly staggering. Does that indicate an element of insecurity about something in our economy or anything in our economy?
I don't agree. You know, markets are so fragile at the moment. You've seen what's happened with stock markets, and you've seen what happened to tech stocks overseas. So, you know, there'll be some push and pull with that. Interest rates going up overseas, which can create opportunities, which also explains the weakening rupee. But these are short-term things. I'm talking about a fundamental philosophical view on the investment opportunity in India, both as a supply destination as well as a domestic market destination. I think are very strong and here to stay.
Right. Let's talk a little bit about how work changed during the COVID pandemic. You know, work from home became a reality. We are the one profession where that doesn't really happen. We still have to report out there. But in Wipro, have you adopted work from home as part of the way it's going to be? Do you see that being a real change?
Yeah. You know, it's interesting, Vishnu. We accidentally discovered this need to work from home, and as a consequence discovered this hybrid model. I'm of a huge belief that the hybrid model is here to stay. There'll be some combination of working from the office and working from home, and I hope we are able to leverage that that hybrid model, you know, all things considered. But I'm a big believer that we must come back to the office some of the time. So for example, we at Wipro have now opened up our offices 3 days a week, Monday, Wednesday and Friday. It's still optional. So we're gently nudging people to come back, but we haven't made it mandatory to come back. But I would like people to come back, and I would like people to come back for two reasons. One is for culture. The organization grows, you learn the organization when you come into the office, when you gossip over a cup of coffee, when you gossip over lunch, when you smell the place. It's incredibly important. You know, over 45% of people have joined us in the last 2 years who haven't walked into a Wipro office. All they know is they get a paycheck from the company and they engage with a few of their team members, perhaps, and their boss. You know, that doesn't drive the osmosis that I think is incredibly important for culture. And our culture, we believe, is incredibly important to us. It's incredibly strong. And the other is for innovation and for idea exchange, right? Because
it doesn't happen
linearly. It doesn't happen on Zoom. It doesn't happen linearly. It happens oftentimes when you're frustrated. It happens oftentimes in very sort of ebbs and flows. And so for both those reasons, I think it's incredibly important that we do come back. But I do hope we can stay with a hybrid model which provides a lot of flexibility. It also drives a huge amount of inclusiveness. It gives people the flexibility and allows us to attract a talent base, which is a challenge today in this market.
In fact, you've spoken about that. You've spoken about the talent base being a problem. Perhaps you're referring to India, I think, specifically. How is that going to be filled? I mean, are you getting the talent that you seek to sort of perform at the very highest levels in the IT sector?
No, I think India is the talent destination for digital talent, for tech talent of the world, and I think we can really own that space long term. So I think that's incredibly powerful for us as a country. Look, we as a company have really focused on how do we build talent from the bottom up, right? So 2 years ago we hired about 10,000 people from campuses. Last year we hired 20,000 people. This year we're going to double that and hire 40,000 people. So there's a huge commitment to build a scale talent base in India and build it from the bottom up. So and then train them and make sure that they are relevant and constantly upgrading to new technologies. But India to me is the talent,
the talent
destination
capital
of the world, absolutely.
You know, when we talk about Wipro, we talk about, you know, what your achievements as a company have been. But I think what really impresses a lot of people is what you've actually put into society. Your father did this. I know that the Wipro Foundation does this as well. And I have some statistics over here which, you know, India's top 1% makes 3 times more than the bottom 10% combined. You know, more people are being pushed into poverty as prices rise. And then you've got a foundation like yours which continues to try and help people. Why do you do this?
Look, our philosophy is to whom much is given, much is expected, right? Our philosophy is that you cannot, living in a country like India, be divorced and disconnected from the realities and the challenges of the ground. You cannot take this privilege for granted. You just cannot. And so it's an incredibly core part of my father's philosophy. I deeply agree and resonate with it, and so it's core to us. But but there are 2 distinct pieces. One is the Wipro Foundation, which is the work that Wipro does. The other is the Azim Premji Foundation. And I don't know how many people know this, but 67% of the economic interest of Wipro is irrevocably owned by the Azim Premji Foundation. So I tell customers this all the time, that 67 cents or 67 paise of every dollar or rupee we make goes to a good cause. But that's deeply important to us. All our work is very strongly India-centric, and that is a very strong philosophy that continues, and is also very embedded in the DNA of Wipro. So
how is it embedded in your own thinking, you know, growing up as Azim Premji's son? How was this, how were these ideas something which he evidently discussed with you deeply? How has that influenced you?
You know, we grew up as a unit of 5 with my grandmother. My grandmother started and ran something with somebody else called the Children's Orthopedic Hospital in Bombay. It focused around polio and cerebral palsy. And so from very early days, the sense of giving and being part of the community was just at the background. It was just always a part of our existence. And then, you know, when Wipro really came into its own in early 2000, we discussed this, and we were of the view, and my father particularly, that look, you cannot not do something. You just cannot. And that was as simple as that.
It was an easy choice. What are some of the areas where the foundation has invested in, both the Azim Premji Foundation and the Wipro Foundation? What are some of the other areas which you may be considering?
So the Wipro Foundation largely does work in locations in which Wipro is present. So largely urban centers. We do a lot of work around education for disabled children. We do a lot of work around construction of schools. We do a fair amount of work on STEM education in the markets of the US and the UK, where we work with teachers to help them be better STEM teachers so they can produce better STEM students. The Azim Premji Foundation has sort of 3 big verticals. It has one vertical which is the field, which is deep presence on the ground. One of our big learnings, Vishnu, has been that you cannot be relevant unless you have your feet on the ground and are really working in the districts, in the blocks, in the villages. The second big pillar is our university, the Azim Premji University, which is in Bangalore. A second one will open in Bhopal, and then we'll have 2 more perhaps over the coming few years. And they attract people who have a social orientation, who are doing masters in development and education and governance and law and those kinds of things. And the third is a grant-making organization, where we support organizations who are doing terrific work in areas of vulnerability, domestic violence, adolescent girls, street children, runaway children, people with disabilities, small and marginal farmers, those kinds of things. And so those are the 3 verticals, and the verticals emerged through the work of education, which has now become a horizontal. So we've leveraged the field, the university and grant making to drive education. But as we are growing, we're now expanding into other horizontals. So healthcare and livelihoods are going to be a big focus for us. But you know, the challenge with philanthropy is you can get distracted very easily, and we're trying very hard to stay focused to be able to have impact on scale.
Look, it's been wonderful speaking to you, and you know, the optimism which you have, not just in terms of IT, but also philanthropy, it really motivates so many people across the country. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank
Good.
you. Thanks.
Good.